All right. What's up, guys? I hope you're doing well. I want to go over my new post. I'm one of the things that I always keep kind of touting, right? Is understanding opposing side the opposing side of your argument, right? And so one of the things is one of my arguments, I guess I would say, I'm not a huge fan of socialism to say the least. At least, and you'll find that out if you actually read my stuff and listen to me talk and everything else. I'm very much a free market capitalism um, kind of guy, right? That being said, I started this to I wanted to do this post to kind of actually, like practice what I preach and show it. So I tried to make an argument for socialism and talk about the advantages of it, right? Um, and basically, I tried to write this, except for the intro paragraph here, and then the final section in the post. And I say this in the article too, if you read it. um, that I tried to do it as objective as possible to like not have my bias be a problem in there. Um, you can see if I did that or not. I'll try to do it again in the video. We'll see how that goes. But anyways, so the advantages of socialism. What is socialism? So it, as defined by Investopedia, which is where I found kind of the most condensed um, definition, right? It's a populist political and economic system based on public ownership of the means of production, right? I mean, that's something it's pretty fundamental that, and people tend to know and understand that, excuse me, because it's like the whole like owning the means of production. You hear that all the time with socialism, communism, so on, right? And keep in mind that it's political and economic. There's a reason there's two different terms right there, right? There's two different types almost. There's actually multiple different types of socialism, which I plan on getting to in future posts and actually going more in depth as I learn more about them. But anyways, basically what this means is that all legal production and decisions basically. So production and distribution decisions are all made by central planners for the most part that oversee the entire nation, right? Um, Central planners that their rule is law or their word is law, I should say, stuff like that. Um, but one then the reason um, I talked about how there's a reason that it's political and economic, um, is because it is possible for a socialist state to have both socialist and capitalist kind of characteristics, right? We saw that with China, to where like politically, they're communist slash socialist, right? But economically, they're very capitalist, right? At least they were. That might be changing now and stuff like that. Just that's nuanced stuff. That's not the point of this article. Um, but anyways, so you can have both, right? Um, that's why they were able to grow so fast the past couple decades or so. But anyways, one of the main people seem to use like communism and socialism almost interchangeably, and that's not technically right. I mean, they're close, but one of the differences is socialism allows for the existence of capitalism in parts of the economy, sort of what I was alluding to earlier with China, where they did allow lots of small and medium-sized banks, local banks throughout the region and stuff, because China noticed that that was something that the Soviet Union lacked, and that's why one of the reasons why the Soviet Union fell. But uh, I'll try not to go down those rabbit holes as this is supposed to be an argument for socialism that we'll get to in a minute. Found this picture from the German Revolution in Berlin in 1848. Um, okay, so some of the advantages is social equality. Um, right, and this kind of basically socialism is going to I'm trying to tailor my verbiage to actually give an argument for socialism, like on the fly, since this is live, and so we'll see how that goes. But okay, one of the advantages of socialism is social equality, right? Because it'll get rid of the whole disparity in wealth, aka the wealth gap, unemployment, and inflation. All of those are going to be reduced, right? Or would be reduced, I should say. Um, and this is because wealth will be distributed fairly amongst the citizens of the state, right? Keep in mind this says fairly distributed, not equally distributed, right? Um, and that's I'll get into that later when I stop trying to make an argument for it. But anyways, so the government controls the economy basically through price controls. Everything, the price of all the goods, transportation, gas, whatever, is centrally planned, right? All of those are like the government makes those decisions. There's no like free market stuff in an economically socialist state, right? Um, and they do this in such a way as to avoid excess or insufficient production of a particular good or service, right? Because if you have too little of it, if it's insufficient production, then you're not going to have enough. And if it's excess, then there's way too much. And so trying to keep that in that excess capacity, it's argued that it'll be that could be used elsewhere, right? So basically, on the topic of inflation, it basically controlling the prices of goods through price controls. Reduce the prices won't increase, obviously, or at least the government can decide not to increase the prices, therefore keeping goods affordable for working people. Um, Economic planning, right, is another thing. Kind of goes back on the price controls, right? The economy is centrally planned, and so therefore it could become more efficient across the entire state because the state is making those day-to-day decisions. Um, and since the decision for the use of a particular like piece of land um, or resource is centralized to one entity, there's kind of a it can be made to maximize the benefit for the state rather than for a particular special interest, right? Another thing you see in socialist economies and countries is the nationalization of key industries like the oil industry in Venezuela and stuff like that, right? And so basically, when an industry is nationalized, the state directly invests into the industry, right? Because they're the ones controlling prices and making the decisions, right? And so that will cause it to grow to optimal capacity. Um, and any profits made from those investments can either be reinvested into the industry or distributed to different industries for the overall national good. The producers of these goods and services are able to focus on goals for the social good rather than those of the market. So, what I meant by this is basically since the government is making the decisions, there's still people having to actually do the production. There's still people in the factories. There's still managers and stuff to help things go along, right? Um, so now instead of their motive being profit driven, to where they're trying to maximize their profit and give it to say shareholders or just the owners or whatever the structure may be, it's basically their whole goal of production is for the social good, right? So that the people have the resources or whatever that they're producing, or that good or service or whatever that may be. The next advantage is the redistribution of wealth. Um, Basically, through like progressive tax policies, wealth is transferred from the wealthy people to the government so that it can be distributed fairly to overall society, right? And this can reach like the working class and stuff, and through either public services, investment in their industry, therefore creating growth, right? So this would show up as like subsidized or free education, healthcare, stuff like that. And they can also the government would be able to subsidize like housing and utilities and other living expenses and stuff. Uh, Another advantage of socialism is the employment protection, right? And so basically, you're guaranteed a job. Um, and then you also would have like a minimum wage, and so or you could have a minimum wage if the state decides that. Um, and therefore, you will be able to remain in your job, have the living wage, and afford a decent life, right? And this also comes along with the freedom to unionize and basically guaranteed recognition for your union and stuff like that. Um, that's what I have so far. Um, I feel like my tone probably wasn't the best, but I tried to. It's a lot more difficult to like tailor the words. It's a lot more difficult to tailor your speech on the fly than you would think. At least it was for me, considering I'm not used to having to tailor what I say. But anyways, okay. One of the things that I'm going to say, and I say down here somewhere, but I just didn't highlight it in my final thoughts. This is basically where I go about how, you know, probably doesn't work. And just a couple reasons why I wasn't going. I don't want to make these obnoxiously long, especially since me basically trying to me. The whole point of this post was to produce an argument for socialism, right? And so I didn't want to add too much to the an argument against it, because that's something that I've have a lot more experience with, and so that'll be a separate post. And I didn't want to make it just the majority of the post was supposed to be for socialism, right? It's a final point. But one of the things that I would like to bring up is it stated fair distribution of wealth, right? But who defines fair? The state? Because I mean, if you ask, and I think I use the example, like if you ask a doctor who works 80 hours a week, if they want to be paired, the depth, what a person. Okay, let me figure out how to phrase this. So a doctor who works 80 hours a week and say like a single mother who works at a fast food restaurant probably have very different definitions of what a fair like wage or fair like what how much wealth they should have, right? There's a very different can almost guarantee they'll have a different opinion on that. So who defines fair? And is it a fluid definition to where it changes on a daily basis? Or what's the problem with that? And also the one thing that I noticed through these arguments, right? Because to kind of help me along, I watched a few videos and read quite a few articles on basically arguments for socialism. And one of the biggest it's like the biggest mode that they brought up was the price controls, right? That was like their biggest argument is like if you allow the government to use price controls. um and another thing, there was always caveats to all of these advantages or whatever that I found. Excuse me. Like if the government's allowed to stuff like that, there was always a caveat um to like why it wouldn't. Basically it's like in physics and stuff that you or science you deal with all the time in like the basic classes or whatever. They're like assume no friction, even though there's very 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 few situations in which that could possibly be possible, or at least that it's negligible in real life. You still use that to teach the basic concepts, and that's pretty much all the assumptions that I found, right? um But we know from experience, price controls lead to shortages. And I'd go through an example, kind of a thought experiment that I did on the fly. So there's that. And basically, you can't expect one entity to make um, that many decisions a day, right? On very, very specific things. So, like, one of the things that I found are the reason, because in the beginning of the article or whatever of this video, started talking about how we'll say, China, right? How they went into the Soviet Union after its fall. and basically tried to figure out what went wrong and why it didn't work, right? And they found basically that it was the banking system, right, and price discovery. So that's why you saw China have they just completely started pumping out small local banks all throughout the regions. They were pretty much everywhere. Um, at least from what I found. I haven't actually been there, so um, and there was the lack of price discovery which is why there were massive shortages too, right? It's the whole thing. It's like you see the bread lines and stuff from the Soviet Union, and it was like everyone had money. They just there was nothing to buy. You need stuff to use money. It doesn't matter what the price is. If there's no stuff, who cares? I mean, if it's paper money, you can at least use it to start a fire. But beyond that, does it really have much use besides a transfer of purchasing power? Really? I mean, like if you got $20, um, I like to think of it as like 4 loaves of bread or whatever it is now. I don't buy bread anymore, but you get what I mean. How much does $20 actually give you in physical stuff that I can, consume? But anyways, and basically all of that, when decided by supply and demand, like in a free market economy and stuff like that, um, it's much more instantaneous because you have people who have been doing things in an industry for, say, like 40, 50 years, and they can probably make better decisions than some ex-lawyer who got elected to some office or was just buddies with someone else. But anyways, that's pretty much it for now. I put other links down here. I did a post on stakeholder capitalism. If you're interested in that, that's something. I don't know if it's relatively new. I think there've been books about it for a few decades, but it's actually starting to be talked about, I guess. And also other major theories, and this is a category in which I'm putting stuff like this in. And also, if you want to look more into the nuances between communism and socialism, here's a link to an Investopedia article. Because since that what going in between the differences of these wasn't the point of this post, but here is a post done at Investopedia or whatever that I read to go more in depth in the differences. But yeah, that's all I got for this post. I hope you guys found it helpful, and I hope you guys have a good day.